David. I haven't told you, but we have a YouTube channel that we are streaming everything, and also we are recording everything to have a reference of the. So maybe he's coming. But welcome for the ones that are here. This is a program that started with Ultralab. Sorry, that started with 3 partners. It's a European program. Started with the Nerve Center, which is the leader, and Declan is part of the team and is the curator of the conceptual things of the project. And Javier is the director of the FabLab Limerick in the University of Limerick. I'm part of Ultralab, which is, I guess, was an experiment to have this like a private company, even that we work a lot with artists and art in general, being partnered in this kind of, in this European project that allowed us to put together institutions, non-profit institutions, and Ultralab. No? The idea is of the symposium was mostly to present what we did and to discuss a little bit what happened and to put together all of us. Some of the artists maybe are seeing this through the streaming. We hope so. And then David is being invited. Hello, David. ¿Me escuchas? Okay. David is part of the. You don't hear me? Okay, no problem. Someone is coming to fix it. David, hola, hola. Probando sonido. David. ¿Me escuchas, David? Hola, David. Okay. ¿Me escuchas, David? Ahora sí. Ok. Sí me escucha, David, ¿eh? Ok. Ahora tenemos que escucharte a ti. No te escuchamos todavía, no. A ver. Hola, hola. No llegó David. Buenas. Hola. No te preocupes, David, que estamos aquí verificando tu salida de audio. ¿Quieres que llame a...? Okay. Un momento.
Hola. ¿Se me oye?
Perfectamente.
Lo único malo es que hay un ruido de fondo como de motor o algo.
¿Tiene feedback? ¿Le ponemos mute aquí para que no haga feedback? Como quieras.
Mucho mejor. Y entonces ahora me oís. Si me oís, poned las manos en el aire. Vale, muy bien. Muy bien. Entonces, empezamos, ¿queréis? Lo que tengo es un feedback ahora mismo del streaming. El ruido del stream está entrando con el retardo que tiene del stream. Pero eso es culpa mía, es culpa mía. Es culpa mía porque tengo abierto el streaming por aquí. Un momento. Ahora. Perfecto. Pues ya, si ya estáis listos, yo estoy listo.
Ok. Bueno, David, poca presentación tiene. Sorry, David is part of the team who started the project, and he's still, and now is in charge of the educational area of Arduino. And he will talk about how open communities and open technologies help to develop all what we have now. Okay.
Muy bien. ¿Empezamos? ¿Sí? Vale. Vale. Manos en el aire. Voy a compartir mi pantalla. Vamos a ver esto por aquí. He compartido las transparencias, como suele ser un problema siempre el tema de mostrar algo a través de Internet para que la gente que quiera pueda tener mis transparencias y utilizarlas a su gusto. Bueno, entonces, a partir de este momento ya no os estoy viendo, con lo cual si tenéis que hacerme algún comentario, por favor, me notificáis. Encendéis el micrófono o lo que sea, porque sencillamente no os veo. Bueno, mi nombre es David Cuartielles y trabajo, entre otras, para la Universidad de Malmo. Llevo 17 años como profesor y como estudiante de doctorado. No, de estudiante de doctorado solo llevo 14, no 17, pero
David,
aún así creo que es un número
David,
bastante...
perdona.
Sí.
¿Puedes hacerla en inglés?
Ay, sí, perdón. Voy a hacerla en inglés y se me ha olvidado. Okay. Sorry for that. I was going to do this in English and I started in Spanish for some reason. I got so engaged with the technical problems before starting. So, yeah, my name is David Cuartielles and I'm assistant professor at the School of Arts and Communication at Malmo University. I've been there for 17 years. And I'm also writing my PhD. I've been doing this for 14 years, which is also a pretty substantial amount of time. And today I'm going to talk about the relationship between art and technology and how it affects the platforms like Arduino, Openframeworks, etc., etc. The talk is not going to be that much about the technology. People are used to see me talking about technology in general, but I'm going to try to talk about something else. So I hope it will not take you too much by surprise. So this is me, and this is my previous laboratory at the university. And as you can see, it's a very average university with very average teachers doing very average things. In this case, we work with design and art, which means that we do what we should do doing design and art, and we try to challenge a lot of preconceptions about different things. But I'm here today to talk about open platforms for art, and I want to open with the question whether this is only about technology. And I will not give you a conclusion. I'll give you some reflections at the end, but I will mostly talk about which is the relationship between technology and art in a very broad sense. Since I'm the guy opening this morning, what I want to do is to leave you with some reflections so you can use them for later. It's mainly because I'm not there to continue discussing in person. So just one note to the audience, I'm looking for feedback. This presentation is a bit speculative. It's based on reflections that I'm drawing because I'm writing about this topic. And the things I'm saying, I think you should not take them as statements. I think you should take them as propositions, and whether you like them or not, it's nothing I'm saying like, it's written in stone. Is something I'm looking into because I think it's interesting. And all your feedback is very valuable. Therefore, I just shared through Twitter the presentation open for comments. So if you have any comments, please just feel free and add comments to it. It's on Google Drive, so you can just use it. And whatever you say might be relevant for my doctoral thesis. So, so if you say something with a reference, it's a lot better than without the reference. So my goal is to talk about the relationship between platforms and infrastructures, and which basically talks about the difference between the public and the private to some extent. And all of these things always in relation to technology. So I'm going to look at the way some scholars analyze digital platforms and infrastructures, mostly because the link between those two different things are getting more and more blurred, to the point that some people in the audience right now might not really understand what is the difference between a platform and an infrastructure. And I will come to some point in my presentation when I hope I will be able of making this point clear. I want to start with a quote from Norbert Wiener, who is the father of cybernetics, which is a field that at some point in history became very, very influential. And cybernetics as a field was born after World War II. And the idea was basically to explain that humans and machines are going to relate in a much closer way that they didn't up to this point, or up to that point in history. The first cybernetics book is from the 60s, and this one I'm referring to is from the 50s or 60s. And the idea behind this, and what I highlight in this slide, is that humans are knit into an organization, but this organization is not just made of human beings. It's also made of other things. And these other things are machines, but it could be established rules or relationships that have existed for a while. And those rules and relationships can be enforced either through other persons or through machines and algorithms. And this is what we're seeing right now, where we're living right now. And many things we're questioning ourselves in our society about things like, I don't know, automatically driven cars or things like this, are going through this idea that some of the decisions that have been traditionally been taken by humans are being taken by algorithms that have been programmed by humans in the first place, but they don't have the same level of agency or at least let's say authorship. So I will base my whole presentation in a series of definitions. So even though it says first some definitions, basically the whole presentation is a list of definitions that I hope it will get handy to continue talking about other things. And as I said earlier, these definitions are the ones that I'm using to talk about my research. Some people might look at them in a bit of a different way, but this really helps me having conversations with people about how they understand different things. So first, I would like to introduce the idea of a tool. And a tool is the extension of the body or the mind to perform one action. One example, as I put here, is the hammer. The hammer is a mechanical extension of our body. It's a machine that its ends in a piece of iron, and making the right movement between our arm and our wrist, we can imprint a huge amount of pressure in a very small point, what will allow, for example, a nail to be nailed to a piece of wood, or to crack a nut, or even break a stone. It depends on the different factors. And all of those things at a minimal expense on our body. If you try to hammer a nail with your hand, it's definitely going to hurt you. At the same time, you could think about digital tools that more and more exist, and I will just make some examples later so you can look at it. So when I talk about tools, I really like to show this picture. It shows the idea that we have some tools that are not necessarily needed to perform life, but we have learned that make our life easier. So we could totally eat with our hands, but it's a lot cleaner, for example, if you use cutlery. And the reason why I like this picture is because we typically think that tools are going to make our life easier and are going to help us perform tasks better, but they still need a learning process. For example, a knife is a very dangerous tool. You could cut your finger if you don't use it right. So when we want a child to start cutting something, we give them a plastic knife. The plastic knife will definitely not cut most of the things the kid wants to cut, but it will train the kid about the use of this tool. And in that way, we'll make this kid adjusted to the way we as humans in general in society understand how we should be, for example, behaving in public. We should definitely, or we should not eat with our hands. That's a rule we have imposed. We should use cutlery. Then you need to know how to use the knife. If you make it to 30 years without knowing how to use the knife, then you're going to be really socially awkward. So, yeah, this is one of the things. But not everything is the same in the computing age. And I'm going to quote Plantin here. It says like Tinder, electronic mail, and numerically controlled machine tools involve computing. And it's not really clear they should be analyzed in the same way. And when Plantin says this, he's talking about context. But also the important thing is that we're not just talking about devices. We're also talking about how these devices include interactions with humans, and these kind of assemblies of humans and machines determine the how things are going to be done and the who is being doing these things. And as things become more complex, at the same time they become more simple. And I think that this should be understood in the following way. As technology becomes more and more complex, if we want this technology to be available for average users, we also have to add a layer on top of it, an interface that makes it more simple so that the average Joe can use this tool, this system. And the system behind this interface could be mega complex, but towards this one user, it will just be a very simple tool. In that way, you could use a very complex artificial intelligence agent, for example, that took years to develop, that could be used in the same way as a hammer by user to perform very simple activities. So in that way, we will see how very complex systems can at the same time become easier, or they have to become easier and simpler, and they have to be degraded to the level of tools. And especially this happens in the digital age, because complexity can be encapsulated in more and more layers that are put around the previous functionality. Then we find the toolbox. And the toolbox is a collection of tools and small materials that define a certain level of expertise by the owner. So not everybody has a toolbox. For example, a carpenter might have a toolbox like this one. And as you see, there's just tools for carpentry here, not for stonemason, not for, I don't know, baking. It's just to handle or work with wood. There is saws and there is, how it's called, different kinds of screws, etc. in there. And the idea of a toolbox is that is aimed at people that are going to be performing certain types of tasks in an accurate way, and that they know their drill. They know in which way they're going to be doing things. But it turns out that socially, like, everybody has a small toolbox. Sorry, in society, not socially, but in society, like everybody has a small box with a hammer and some nails and so on. And it's kind of like commonly accepted that everybody knows how to use those things. It's the same thing as cutlery. It's commonly accepted that everybody has to know how to eat with cutlery up to some extent. But the more professional you become, the more precise you become in a certain field, the more exact your toolbox will become. So when it comes to software, I love this one quote from the Mr. Robot TV series in the chapter called Hidden Process. At some point, the hero of the series, or the anti-hero, I don't know how to define him, is about to perform a major hack where he's going to get some stuff from the police. He's going to get some information, and he needs to social engineer the police. But in order to do that, he needs some equipment. And he says, the cops confiscated all of my equipment. If you want this done tonight, I need hardware. So they just go to a computer store and they buy computers and a fax machine or printer, I can't remember exactly, and a couple of phones and SIM cards. And so that's kind of like the toolbox for this guy. You know, this toolbox includes some hardware, this reusable material, and some things that are not exactly reusable, like the ink in the printer or the SIM cards, because, you know, in this particular case, the SIM cards are destroyed at the end of every move, so that it cannot be traced back. So this describes basically a digital toolbox. It does not necessarily have to be a physical toolbox. And then we talk about, I think it's important to talk about kits. And kits are, in essence, a collection of materials that are aimed to be used once, so that together with some sort of toolbox or basic tools that you have on your own, you can perform a certain orchestrated construction. And a classic example would be a piece of IKEA furniture. And this is the previously called Expedit bookshelf from IKEA. Now it's called Kallax. And the relevant thing about this shelf is one of the most sold items in the world in terms of furniture. The most sold is the Billy shelf, and this is one of the following ones. And I like it because it's been designed to be exactly the size of a long play record. So if you're a long play collector, this shelf is for you. At the same time, the boxes are big enough to contain large books, and it's really sturdy, or it could contain toys. So you can easily move the shelf from context to context. So the use of this is not predetermined. What is predetermined is the process of mounting it. And as a kit, with very few tools, basically this box comes with one single tool, and you don't need anything else. You can build it up. And in theory, the script, the instructions, the manual for these kits, they let you build this thing in one direction. It doesn't mean that you couldn't do your own things, like you can see in this picture here, where people have been doing their own hacks of this library, of this bookshelf, sorry. So it's really up to you to do it differently. It's not how it was intended in the first place. The use was designed to be different. But most users will not go this far. Most users will stick to the original design. So then we go into the concept of platform. And the platform is basically a techno-economic network. And this is a complex concept. And I'm going to try to describe it to you in a nice way. But in essence, this techno-economic network, which is an assembly of people and machines, is built through the collaboration of end users and developers. And the most clear example of a platform right now is the internet. And here you have one of these multiple illustrations that show how the internet could look like, or the internet looks like maps of the internet. You know, there's plenty of this. But the real definition of platform shows up. Well, there is a long history on the definition of platform. I'm just going to take one. And the term platform shows up, according to Plantin, when Microsoft defines Windows as a platform in comparison to, for example, Netscape, which was just a tool. You see, here we start with this distinction between tools and platforms. Like Netscape is something that is used for something, that is just a tool that is used to browse the internet. For those of you that don't know, Netscape was the first graphical browser for the internet. On the other hand, Windows is something else that allows you to do multiple things. You know, it's a system where you have a certain degree of freedom within its constraints, where you can, you know, look at how you order files, where you can open applications, which will be tools, where you can administer the hardware in the computer. this platform, obviously, if Windows is not the same platform, it's just that the first time it shows up in the literature as something like this. The thing is that these platforms, they survive through self-defined mechanisms to produce money, which will be paying for them. For example, Microsoft Windows is something you have to pay for. It was an operating system. You have to pay for it to run on your machine. There is other platforms like Facebook or Twitter that are paid through a different currency. You pay through likes or retweets. Those likes and retweets can be converted into money through, for example, advertisements. And in that way, they can pay for the thing. So what you perceive to be free is not really free. But I mean, that's an entirely different discussion. But basically, having to be able of maintaining these platforms, it's what determines the technical properties and shape the communication in somehow inflexible ways. As a platform, Facebook could be just a virtual meeting point where people could do virtually anything. But the way you communicate is through posting things on these walls and being able of answering or questions to it. The same thing as Twitter. It's a common wall where you read what you want and you answer to people that you like. And then you're even limited or constrained in the amount of characters you can post. But there is a tremendous amount of different digital platforms. And this is another picture taken from Wikipedia where you can see a lot of different different names of platforms listed by category. Like, for example, picture handling platforms or live casting platforms or virtual worlds. And this kind of flower image has been updated constantly because it changes from month to month. There's new platforms showing up all the time. So there's a whole field in research called platform studies, which is looking at how digital artifacts show up and what people can express through them and so on and so forth. But I think that the key aspect to learn here is that platforms are bottom-up structures that emerge from the needs and are commanded by communities of interest. And the interest could be purely social or can be socio-economical. And then it's commanded by users or corporations. This is a very open definition, and I'm going to just give you a couple of examples so you can understand. For example, a platform could emerge because some users meet up and they discover they have the need for a way to exchange information. And they build a piece of software, it could be open source software, and they build a mail exchange platform. And in that way, they can communicate to one another. And let's say that they build it in a way that can be reused by other people to do other things or to continue to exchange email. That's completely emerging from the user needs. On the other hand, you have something like Facebook that doesn't necessarily emerge from user needs. It emerges from a social need of exchanging pictures between people, or if you know the story of Facebook, voting for the most attractive person. But at the same time, once once it starts to take momentum and people start to use it, and there is a certain things that start to happen that aren't necessarily bonded to the desire of the developer or the desire of the user. If something starts to grow very fast, then, for example, the expenses to maintain it also start to grow. The needs for security also start to grow. So the company or the group of people that are running this service, they need to figure out ways to maintain this system and pay for the different services that are needed for it to exist. And they need to make compromises. And those compromises might not necessarily be in line with their own personal understanding of life. It might just have to do with the fact that it's impossible to maintain it in a different way. And this is a very important aspect to take into account. Things in the platform design happen in a way that sometimes exceeds both the users and developers' understanding or expectations on how things are going to be. And it's really, really hard to control the direction these things are taken. And platforms sometimes acquire some sort of agency and or identity that helps them survive. And this is a reflection we have to make. And these things happen without even having artificial intelligence behind it. It happens because the responsibility of maintaining things gets diluted among a lot of different people that build this system. From a technical standpoint, a platform is made of central components and some complementary components that vary a lot, and then some interfaces for modularity. And if you look at this, for example, again, we're talking about Facebook or Twitter or Google. Let's say Google as a case. There are some core components for Google, which is the user profile and the access to communication, email. And there's some complementary components that are highly variable, like it's Drive, storage, or a picture folder, or so on. And there are some interfaces for modularity. You can look at things in different ways. Like you can make a form for people to submit things, and you can look at the form as the design of the form, as the form that you send to people, or as an Excel spreadsheet for people to, for you to look at the results of this operation with the form. So this is repeated again and again. So this kind of structure, three-layer structure, is how most platforms are built. I'm going to skip this Twitter case. And then finally, we have infrastructure. And infrastructure is a shared, widely accessible system that's typically offered by governments. And a classic example is the railway system or the telephony system or many others. So the difference between platform and infrastructure has to do typically with, historically has to do with the origin. Like an infrastructure will be built by a government because there is a social need, everybody needs it, and it's an agreement that we need to make a social investment in that. But now think about it, for example, Facebook. Most people use Facebook. And it was built through personal interest because people wanted to use it, and no governments are involved into throwing money at this thing for this thing to happen. So the only reason why Facebook can't become a tool for governance, for example, is that there is no direct involvement from governments. So there is no way they can be 100% sure they're controlling communication the right way. And there could be discussions about whether this is good or this is bad. So I'm not really getting married to any of these ideas. I'm just saying that can be both good or bad. So some infrastructures acquire the character of public goods and require a publicly controlled mechanism for development, for operating and for being maintained. And there we have governments or regulated monopolies. And this is typically the case when you're building something new that didn't exist before, that is needed, and is going to be really a systemic change for society. Let's say, for example, when there was no telephony in Spain and the government had to create a company called Telefónica, and Telefónica was compromising to bring telephony to every single village in the country. So that was too expensive. No company will do that. But if the government does it, they can do it when they're losing money, even though they're losing money, because we paid with tax money. So that would be an infrastructure. It can survive because it's somehow paid in a way, because it's a service, and exists even if it's at a loss. So there is also infrastructure studies that we could look into, but I'm going to jump over the slides. You just have them there to use as, if you want to. Because I think that the important concept here is platformizing or infrastructuring. Those are two very complex words to say. But the idea of platformizing is that you could take something that is already public and is existing, and then you make it private. And this is what happened with Telefónica, for example, in Spain. But it happened with Deutsche Telekom in Germany, or with Telia in Sweden, or most of the telephony companies in Europe were built through the public tax money, and then they were sold to private entities, and then were operated as private entities, because it's, let's say, easier from an economic point of view, because if somebody works for the government, for example, that person can't really be fired according to the Spanish regulation. But if it's a public company, a private company, then, if they need to get rid of 20,000 workers, they can totally do it tomorrow. So it becomes a lot easier to handle certain things, and especially when technology keeps on evolving and evolving and evolving and making some process cheaper. And a lot of these people that were needed to rise up the system are not really needed any longer. So platformizing is a very interesting process, though it's very dangerous for society. Another of these problems with platformizing is that there is this tendency to abandon openness in general. And here you see Plantini again, as I show in the slide here, is mentioning this idea that Facebook is built as a series of walled gardens where there is no more open HTTP transactions. They use the HTTP or HTTPS protocol, but they don't allow, for example, for machines to harvest this data and categorize it. You know, they say it's for user privacy, but it could as well be for their own business. Because if users give them their data, why should they share the data with other people? Because in that case, data will stop being valuable. You know. So, and they operate through internal APIs that don't allow people to really access them. So this is making the internet from being an open wild space, an open field, into a walled garden. And that idea of platformizing can be applied to any other kind of conceptual infrastructure. So I spoke for like 25 minutes now, so I think I'm gonna draw some conclusions, and so then we can just hopefully through the internet have a conversation. So here my personal reflection about platform versus infrastructures. First of all, platforms are bottom-up structures. They emerge from needs by communities of interest. And these communities of interest can either be purely social or socio-economical. Since we are people, there's always a social aspect in it. So Facebook will be a socio-economical interest. Some other examples could just draw on the social. Then infrastructures are typically top-down. So there is a societal need. This is brought up with, you know, the European Commission, the Spanish government, or whatever, and then they decide, okay, we need to make a huge investment in this, and we need to decide on a standard, and hopefully open so that companies can compete into it, and then we put it in place, and then it happens. So to some extent, it is as is platforms where prototypes of infrastructures. You know, social networks are less than 20 years old. So it seems to be very hard for a government to decide to invest in building a social network. But in 100 years, who knows if social networks will be the most common way to have distributed communication among people. And then governments will have to decide building their own infrastructure on this regard. Maybe Facebook won't exist anymore. I mean, who knows? So what this comes to show is that basically platforms are just a way to test with people that are happy to volunteer and try out and even sometimes invest money whether these things work. And you might think that this idea is crazy, but it's not that crazy. There's always been early adopters of things. There's always been people that thought that having a car was really cool when John Ford was, sorry, not John Ford, when Mr. Ford was invented the first cars. And when the Model T was out, right? And people were trying to drive a car and they had little money or a lot of money and they wanted a car. But then the real infrastructure movement is when those cars are made into buses or trains and public transportation shows up. So there's always these early adopters of stuff. So maybe right now our generation is the early adopters of Facebook, and then in the future there will be a public Facebook. Who knows? So hopefully or possibly large economically profitable infrastructures will be platformized. And this has happened all the time, as I explained earlier. So right now we don't have, or it doesn't come to my mind right now, any like public infrastructures that are economically profitable that can be platformized, because in every possible country this has already been platformized. You know, telecommunication companies, water companies, trash collection companies, security companies have been, you know, platformized, and there are now services available. One example of this, for example, is the privatization of the public high school services in Sweden. People think that Sweden has 100% public schooling when you're outside from Sweden. It's not really true. I mean, the schools themselves are public. It's your right to go to school, but they are serviced by private companies. And this sometimes gives very interesting situations when, for example, the company running 10 schools in a certain region goes bankrupt, And then all of those thousands of students have to be relocated into other schools from like one day to the next, because a company can go bankrupt in the middle of an academic year. And this has actually happened here in Sweden. So we can see how some of these public services, which are infrastructures, can be platformized and can work with a higher or less or lower degree of success. So why is this whole discussion relevant to art, and why is technology important? Well, these concepts of platformatization and infrastructurization are key in the discussion of this idea of walled gardens. And this has happened in hardware, you know. One second, I think I need to drink some water. Yeah, no. Sorry, I've been talking for 20 minutes in a row and I hadn't realized how dry my throat had gotten. So basically, so if because of the speed of development of technology right now, very many things are built first as platforms and not as infrastructures. In the past, it was the other way around. Many things were built as infrastructures and then were being platformized. And this is an interesting situation because it affects every layer of society. And in hardware, this is exactly how things happen. You know, whatever things are manufactured and so on, they're manufactured freely as long as there is no standard. People are going in within the wild, and then at some point they need to reach the level of regulation. And one of the examples where this is happening is, for example, the field of Internet of Things, which is a field where right now we haven't really reached a technical agreement on which is the proper protocol for communication, which is the proper system for ensuring that data is transferred in a secure way. For example, there is a European research projects analyzing whether blockchain could be a secure way for deciding whether the data can be exchanged with certain actors and so on and so forth. So we see that the technology is being built as platforms, and then at some point it needs to be infrastructuralized. And the problem we have right now is that we're locked in a system that is based on economical investment, and that's making really, really hard to try things more than once. So smaller developers really have a hard time investing to make their own things compatible with the whole design space. And this in art is a problem, because if you want to make something that will affect a lot of people, that has to deal with digital platforms and has to do with hardware, so that people can, for example, buildings like a critical scenarios. I think later today or tomorrow, Tomas from Barcelona will talk from the FabLab network, and this will be building smart citizen. There is no proper standard in how to map sensor data that can be used in multiple ways. This makes that if they want to build something, anybody wants to build like air quality sensors, for example, to criticize something in a certain way or map data in a certain creative way or whatever, they need to make an investment that they don't know if it will last for 10 years. So then the question always pops up, is it really worth to make this investment? So this really affects a field like art, where suddenly things are a lot more ephemeral, so that they're going to die much faster. And then we also have this other concept that control happens not only in the way the technology performs tasks, but also in the way technology traps users into it. This is kind of like a circumstance or conclusion from the previous slide. You know, you are not controlled because technology might be looking at your data. That's obviously, you know, but technology traps you into this system. You know, for example, if all of your friends use Facebook to communicate, at some point you're forced to use Facebook to communicate. It becomes a social need. It's like eating with fork and knife. It becomes a social necessity. And you're automatically excluding yourself from that social group if you're not doing it. So if something really expands and is adopted by everybody, and you decide to be the outsider, you know, then you are not really following the technology. Well, I love this slide here. It's again an excerpt from the book I was talking about earlier from Norbert Wiener. You can check in the references where it says like commands are information. So this goes in both ways. But basically, when you tell somebody what they need to do, that's obviously information that needs to be analyzed and processed and so on and so forth. And it goes in both ways because information are also commands right now. Because if let's say that you follow the news that you like, then information is more or less telling you who to vote. That's also a situation that is very interesting. So what's happening from the moment this book was written in the 50s, 60s until now is that this relationship that was unidirectional is now bidirectional. So one of my conclusions is that the only way to escape control is to program obsolescence, which in a way is a governmental indirect regulatory mechanism that is implanted. Sorry, it's not governmental, but it's a implanted regulatory mechanism by device manufacturers. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you are in a situation where you're dealing with a platform that is not regulated because it's not established by government, for example, something as simple as program obsolescence will force everybody to have a self-regulation mechanism so that so that we can always improve the system. Let's say you invent a system that allows you to hack the system systematically and, let's say, commit crime. Well, one way to enforce that people stop committing crime is to bring them to court, for example. Another way is to change the system. So if the system improves and the software that commands the system changes, and you stop people of being capable of doing things to program obsolescence, then it's like you added regulation, self-regulation to systems without having to go through the cumbersome process of bringing law in. So in a sense, it might be possible to have platforms take the role of infrastructures without having to have governmental inference in those systems. But that will require systems to be constantly innovating and have the possibility of changing without too much expense. And that's actually what the relationship between software and hardware allows. So just to close, I think that many people expected me to be talking about pure data, Arduino, Openframeworks, or processing, or systems like this. But if you filter any of the systems through this analysis I just made, you will realize how some of the systems emerged as tools and then somehow became platforms because they had a community of people that were commanding their destinies by asking for some needs and some special features. And then some of them, like for example, pure data, as the community fades away, are slowly becoming technically obsolete. So with this, I ask you with the list of references, and I think there is time for some questions without breaking too much the program of the conference of this day. Thank you very much.
Some questions for David, or okay, you have one. Okay. Can you hear us, David?
Yeah. Now I hear you. Now there's no noise somehow.
Hi, David. I find very interesting your ideas about the platform, the infrastructure, and these verbs of these transitions between platforms and infrastructure to platforms. I wanted to ask you, do you think that those processes are kind of, they can happen both ways, right? You imagine like because you mentioned the idea of the prototyping, like a platform prototypes infrastructures, and then infrastructure can be transformed back into a platform, right? Or you think that those directions can't happen on the same technologies, or or is something like the change of phase, like it's liquid, that goes solid, that can go back to liquid if the conditions change, or you see that more as if something changes to a platform, like infrastructure changes to a platform, it's going to go that route. That's
okay. So first thing is that I haven't invented those terms, just to be clear. I just bringing them in. This is a really recent text from Planting. It's from last year. So platformizing comes from Planting, and infrastructuralization comes from some of my colleagues at Malmo University. Well, it's actually called infrastructuring, which is even harder to say. So, but I do believe that those two processes happened. They happen for different reasons. First of all, I think that infrastructuring or infrastructuralization is a democratic need. So let's say that, for example, let's say electronic voting. Let's say we make electronic voting mandatory for everybody. Well, that can only happen if the internet has been infrastructuralized and is available for 100% of the population at their place. If you don't take that step, as long as it is private companies putting the internet at your place, then you cannot really enforce electronic voting. Theoretically, I mean, in practice, I'm pretty sure people will do it, but theoretically, you shouldn't do it because it's not equal for everybody. So that democratic aspect doesn't apply. On the other hand, when something is being already running in the public system for a while and works fine, and you have ensured that democracy, it becomes expensive for the public sector to maintain it for different reasons. As I explained, for example, if you are a public clerk, you work for the government, in some countries, it's really, really hard to get rid of you. Please, I'm not defending this idea, okay? I'm just explaining. So I don't want people to come later to me and try to punch me in the face because I say you can be fired. But basically, so if you get this public company where everybody are public clerks and you make it private, then they operate under the laws of capital and they can easily remove people. The only condition the government will put them is that they have to ensure the service with a certain quality of service. So I think this thing of moving from platform to infrastructure is something we're going to see. We've been seeing it already in the history of humanity for a while, and I think things are going to be coming back and forth because I think the responsibility of the public is to help technology be implemented so that it's available for us, the normal people. And when things are working fine, they don't have the responsibility any longer to maintain it. So they just hand it over to people that can make it more effective and economically viable. But if they say that the companies in that side fail to provide, then the governments might go back and re-infrastructure something so they might make sure the quality can be 100% okay. So I see it as a liquid situation. And I think the problem is that in the beginning, everything was starting as an infrastructure and not as a platform. But because of the speed of development of technology, now we see more things showing up as platforms and not as infrastructures. So I think that first step of going from private to public, instead of going from public to private, is a thing that has really changed. At least in the history of Europe. If you look at the United States, for example, telephony was 100% private from the beginning, right? But you can look at other things. So I think this is what we're seeing. I think it's interesting for many different reasons. For example, it's like a government will have a really hard time, deploying mobile telephony in a country tomorrow. But a company that might have hundreds of base stations in stock somewhere else could go and deploy with these base stations in a new country. This is how we, for example, deployed mobile telephony in Africa or Latin America in the first place. There were a lot of base stations that could be taken from Europe because Europe was making a lot, or the United States, and then put them there, right? And that could only be done by these companies that had access to the technology, not by the governments. The governments could be actors trying to make it happen. So, yeah, but there is no one way. I think that this is just definitions that can be used for having a different level of discussion. I find them very relevant.
Hello, David. It's Declan from Nerve Centre. Just a question about, have you noticed the pace of change or the speed of development? You were largely talking in terms of the metaphor of the walled garden and Facebook and Windows. That's like the corporate sector, but it might be interesting to kind of compare it to the dark web, kind of illegal file sharing and things like that. In the kind of deregulated sector, is there the same issue of almost kind of a hidden corporate powers or hidden kind of innovation kind of solidifying and reifying into single kind of structures, which dominates the whole of kind of the so-called completely deregulated section of the web?
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't looked into that in my research, mostly because I have only worked with this for 14 years. So that was a joke. But so I arrived to this topic because I've been creating different hardware platforms over the years. But when it comes to things like dark web or file sharing or whatever, the question is, how much does the average user access those things? On the other hand, the other question is, how important is for these large corporations that those things exist? You know, I do believe, like, I mean, I was discussing this with my partner, and my partner was making an exhibition in the dark web recently. And at some point we were fantasizing about the whole idea of why does the dark web actually exist? You know, why? You know, my neighbor is not browsing the dark web. We do it almost as a hobby. It's terribly slow. It's like going back to 1999, you know, on a modem. And it's impossible to index. And then we had this idea of like, oh, I'm pretty sure that Google has its own index of the dark web, you know, but they just don't say it. So we came to this conclusion that it needs to exist because those large corporations need it to exist. Because otherwise, probably it would have been, you know, destroyed already. Just look at the case with the Pirate Bay here in Sweden. At some point, everybody involved in the Pirate Bay ended up in jail. And those that didn't commit really a crime, like Peter Sunde, for example, who didn't really commit any kind of crime, even him ended up like a year and a half or something like this in jail. So, you know, as long as there was an interest in using the technology to expand, then it was fine. When it wasn't good enough, then they were banned. So if the dark web still exists, it's because there is no real interest in destroying it at this point. I just can't know why, you know. I don't know if I answered your question or if I just contributed to the conspiracy theory, but
Hi, David. I wanted, maybe if you can give us a little bit the scale of, because you were talking about the platforms and everything, but what is the scale that in users that determines this, you know, when you start, how many, you can give an example of what's happening now with Arduino, no, in general, how are you dealing with?
Well, Arduino has 110 million unique visitors per year, but I don't think that is a valid way of looking at it, because right now, communities of interest can be as small as 2 people. You know, when I look at scale, I don't look at scale in that way. I look at scale more in terms of use and in terms of reusability, because if I make a platform to collaborate with you in something, and this is like actually the conclusion of my thesis, if we design it the right way, I work as a developer and you work as user, and I make it for you. But if I'm capable of designing these tools in a way that can be extrapolated from your usage to more people, then it might become a platform. Not because many people have to collaborate, because I think that's a mistake. People think that everything happens because many people have to collaborate. It's more that many people get to use it. But then, as I said earlier, the more complex something becomes, the more people involved, the more software involved, the more hardware involved, it gets harder and harder to use unless you add this layer of butter on top so that you only see this flat surface. So they actually could be diminished from a platform to a tool. But it has to do with context. Look, one example, for example, is, let's say, Bluemix. Bluemix is a platform from IBM for you to push up IoT applications, and that has a lot of different data sources. And these data sources could be the temperature anywhere in the world, or could be, I don't know, the amount of traffic in Madrid right now. Traffic could be provided by Google, and temperature could be provided by the World Forecasting Network, for example. And then, to build those networks, you have thousands of people working. But to me, as a developer, I only see a URL, which is single API, which is that butter, I just see that surface, and that's everything I need. To me, that's a tool. But for everybody else, that is a platform. You see what I mean? So the context of use really matters. So therefore, there is no real scale for platforms. How big is a platform? How do you define it in users? No, I don't. I define it in reusability. So if things can be reused multiple times, then it is elevated to platform.
Well, David, thanks. I think we don't have more questions. And
perfect timing. It's 11:31.
yeah, we were we were exactly on
Okay.
time. Okay. Thank you, David. Okay, good luck.
Salud.
Bueno, we are going to take a coffee break. We can go all together because it's enough for everybody. So, ¿dónde es? En el mismo nivel, pero... No. Okay, just follow us, okay? And we can come back at 12, okay?
Hola, hola. ¿Qué tal? Mucho mejor, ¿no? Sí, todavía iría como ahí. Ahí mucho mejor, ¿no? Hola, 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 mi nombre es Pedro. Hola, 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 hola. 1, 2, 3. Hola, ¿qué tal? Mucho mejor, ¿no? Incluso con mi acento galaico. Pues, vale, guays.
Hola, 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 hola. Dani, Dani, dame el micro. Vamos. Hola, 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 sonido. Sonido, sonido. Sonido, sonido, sonido. Dame micro. Hola, hola, hola. Ok, continuamos. Marcos, don't run. Adentro, dices. Ok. Ok, esta mesa será en inglés. We are going to have translation over there. Don't worry because en algún momento les tocará a ellos. Declan, if you feel more comfortable with another chair, we have that one or that one. O sea, whatever. Those are from made here in the FabLab. Hola, hola. Okay. Sí, vale. ¿Y tú aquí quieres sacar alguna imagen? Porque lo tienes ahí. Es que no sé si ellos van a querer. Pero si no ponemos la entrada de la web. Sí. Ah, bueno, sí. Les pregunto. Hola, hola. Ok. Bueno, ya sabéis, si vais a utilizar, o sea, no es necesario presentar, pero si queréis hacerlo, pues lo hacemos en un... Ah, ok. Si te quieres quedar aquí, te paso el cable y no tienes que levantar como quieras. Lo puedes poner aquí encima. ¿Tienen agua aquí? Okay. Well, okay. The idea of this table was is to present que no tienes. Aló, aló. Hola, hola, probando, 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 hola. Hola, 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 probando. Sonido, sonido. But I think it's easy. So now it will be easier. Yeah, okay. Okay. So this table, we have the three institutions. No? Of course, part of the two of them are part of the project, European project, and of course Medialab that is collaborating really close to us in this case. And the idea is to talk about how these Fab Labs, these laboratories are dealing to work with artists. No? Some of these laboratories has started as a resource or as a tool for inside an art center already, but in the case of Limerick University, no. So let's see what's going on. What is how do we deal with it, and also it's interesting to see if artists are always related into the normal functioning of a FabLab, no? Because it doesn't have to be really, it's not always a thing that you take by default, no? That something like art is happening in your FabLab, no? Okay, so we can start with Javier.
Okay, so thanks, Gustavo. I'm going to go quite quickly to explain the aspects that, hello, maybe it's too high, no? It's okay. So I'm going to explain briefly the aspects that we think in FabLab Limerick has some kind of uniqueness. Just to give you a bit of context, we are in Limerick. We have two Limerick, well, not from Limerick, but the users from the FabLab here with us. We are in the west coast of Ireland. It's a very small city in the periphery of Europe. And the FabLab that's the door there. We are part of a university, higher education authority, but we had a very, I would say, different way of doing things. The way we started the FabLab there is not the usual university, like college project. I'm going to skip this one. And I think this is a unique aspect of this was an unplanned project that was created inside a very a traditional, established organization, which is one of the biggest employees in the area, the University of Limerick. And we had this, this unplanned way of creating a FabLab, and I think that defined the culture that we created there. It's not part of we didn't become part of the network until we started the FabLab already. So we started the space, and then we evolved that as part of the FabLab global network, and we start working with artists and so on. So one thing that I think is interesting for FabLab Limerick is that we didn't start with a big budget. I didn't go to the president of the university. I asked for 100,000 euros to set up FabLab. I just asked my head of school 2,000 euros to buy parts and start building machines with the students. So this is one of the machines that we built. It's an open source laser cutter, the Laser Saw project. These are 8 students from the undergraduate program at the architecture school. It was just an elective, an optional module within the architecture program. Each semester, we assembling one machine. So it took us to create the FabLab, just equipment, almost 2 years. We assemble a large CNC, Blackfoot, laser saw, and few rep wraps. So we use the budget of materials. Normally, a school of architecture have, a small budget to buy timber and things like that. We use that to buy the parts and assemble the machines. So that led to a problem, which is if in a big organization you make your own machines, the health and safety officer will hate you. They don't want self-built equipment because they have to take responsibility. So we basically were forced outside the studio, and we had to find a place outside the campus in order to work with the machines, because we were not allowed to use the machines in the campus. So luckily for us, Limerick is full of abandoned buildings. So we found this publicly owned abandoned building owned by the city council. They didn't have plans for that, so we asked to use it. We pay a very low rent, 1,000 euros per year, and we moved all the equipment, and we did the same approach. Myself and teaching assistants, we start removing the floor, just making all the renovations ourselves. Again, using the money that the school has for materials. So very tedious, energy consuming, but also it gives us a lot of freedom we could do. And once you are outside the campus and you are a tiny thing in a big campus, nobody cares about what was going on there. Another thing that I think is relevant here is that when you are operating in a small city like Limerick or many others in Europe, it's not like a Medialab here, you know, or bigger cities in terms of critical mass. You know, in a big city, there is already people interested in technology, art, participation, science, and all the crossover. When you move to 70,000 in Citizen City, you have to create that from scratch, because you know all that kind of discussion is not happening there. So it's kind of it's very artificial to create something there when it's nothing. So you have to take care a lot of the community and nurture the community. I'm not saying that in a place like Madrid you don't have to do that. But there, you know, when you start talking about certain things, it's the first time people are hearing about these things. It feels like a transplant. You know, it's like transplanting something into, which has some kind of potential other issues. So we structured the work in the FabLab in three main areas. I have to say that I copy a lot of things that I learned in Medialab when I was working with these two guys years and years ago. So I had a fantastic reference model of how to merge cultural and art activities with education and research. We had to apply that there. So it was very basic, with very little money, and just it was a process of 2 years of just by projects, trying to source 500 euros, 600 euros, a bit more money from the EU, so step by step. Again, this is unplanned. We weren't part of the strategic plan. It's interesting that normally in a university, if you want to start one of these things, you will talk to the president, you will get money, and they will put the project in the strategic plan. And in our case, we were in the strategic plan 3 years later. So we started the project, we operated for 3 years, and then the university added us as part of the strategic plan. And we provide basic, you know, it's very basic at the moment, I have to say. But again, it's creating a nice community, and the space is very open because it's just facing the street. So a lot of people just come in. We have this open door access policy, which is against, again, it brings a lot of problems. The same thing with machines, you can say about access. We are living in a period that public institutions as universities are creating thresholds with swapping cards, IDs in the campus. So just trying to keep a space open to the public, despite we are part of is very difficult. We are always clashing with security, health and safety officers, and so on. Just some of the things that we're doing there. I might not look super exciting, but I think, well, the one on the top, it is, because it's ads. But I mean, we are reacting to the environment. We have an idea of what we want to make there, but at the same time, we depend so much on the community because of the critical mass thing that we have to react. So this is things that most of these projects are created by the community, not ourselves. We have a very good relationship with the art college, which is 2 blocks away. So we started, the whole relationship with the art started not as a plan, but we were working with the students first. That's also interesting, is reacting to the students and then building on top of that, and then the teachers will come, and then the art school would like to have a bigger implication with the FabLab. Few examples of projects that are slightly bigger. We did this 3D printed survey and model of Limerick Center, and we use it as a discussion tool for talking about planning and how to develop the city. It's modular. Normally these models are very expensive, and they are done by craft people. You know, everything is fixed. The good thing about using 3D printing is that you can make it modular. And for example, if you want to talk about a new development in the city, talk with people, citizens, you can just prototype, remove the module, put something else. So it's a tool rather than a fixed object. Then we are doing research because we are part of the architecture school on low-cost digital fabricated structures. This is something that we presented at Maker Faire Rome. It's a low-cost geodesic dome structure made out of cardboard, CNC connectors. Ed knows the structure quite well too. And this is the process. We tested this structure in some music festivals, and then in Rome, and now we are waiting for some money to do the next iteration of the project. It's interesting because you know, I'm sure that we will discuss kind of the culture that happens in Fab Labs. That the good thing about these spaces is that they are open, and a lot of things happen in parallel, and there is a lot of polarization between projects. Like people will see one project and they will copy things, and you know, the whole thing feeds itself. So, and this is one example. This project is based on Shigeru Ban. It's this Japanese architect that is doing cardboard structures since the early 90s, using for shelters. One of the lecturers in the school saw the work that we were doing with the geodesic dome. We have a lot of leftovers of cardboard, so she arranged to create a version of the Shigeru Ban shelters and brought it to Calais, to the jungle. I don't know, this place that was closed a year ago in the north coast of France with all the refugees were. So a place like a FabLab or our FabLab facilitates these type of things. Suddenly a lecturer has a space in a shipping container to bring things to Calais. We have been researching in structures. We have a lot of leftovers. So in 2 weeks, you can fabricate these things and ship it to Calais. This is one. It was used to make large structures in the camp for public spaces, like a nursery, a medical center, and things like that. Then we are doing things on WikiHouse, and we are very interested in the idea of a low-cost, being able to fabricate with FabLab tools, not bigger tools, houses or cheap structures. And then we started, as I said, this relationship with the art in a very unplanned way. First with the students of the art school. Then the students will demand their teachers that, you know, there's a cool place next door, so you have to start, we want to learn those things in the art school, so the lecturers were coming to our classes just to get an idea of what we were doing. Then we started projects like this one, which is traditional sign painting. We'll come to the FabLab, we will do an exhibition there, and then we will start working with traditional sign painters. Then the Future Artist Maker project. You know, it's very, I would say that still it's very amateur, which I think is a good thing. I think amateur approaches could be, or non-professional approaches could be quite interesting, especially for generating new things in a place that doesn't have that critical mass. I think that's it, yeah. that's what we are doing. It's only 2.5 years old at the moment, space. So we are just compared with the Nerve Center, which is 2 decades, the original, or Medialab. We're just a tiny thing that is kind of almost starting to crawl.
Okay. Now Marcos. Marcos is the director of Medialab, where we are now, and he's going to present the Medialab in general. Okay.
Thank you, Gustavo. Yes, I would like to make just a short talk about the topic of the institutions and how, well, new technologies, in a way, shape new models of institutions or not. And recently I received an email about a symposium in IMAL in Brussels that is titled, "So What About Politics?" And in the introduction they quoted this text by Chris Anderson from 2010, where he said, "If the past 10 years have been about discovering post-institutional social models on the web, the next 10 years will be about applying them into the real world." So in my presentation, I will go quickly through this idea of how technologies may shape, new technologies may shape new institutional models or not, and what is happening nowadays. And at the end, I would like to talk about what would be the role of artistic practices or artists in this new institutional context that I believe are emerging. So the first thing I would like to say is that it is really evident that some new tools shape new kinds of practices and also new kinds of institutions. Think, for example, of this building. It used to be a sawmill in the past, and you can see the saws downstairs. Okay, sorry. You can see the saws downstairs, and this was an infrastructure for production. This part of the building was the place where they dried the woods cut, so there weren't any windows there. And you can see that there are also, even this building was one of the first examples using this kind of concrete to being built. They still have the wood culture inside, so you can see these beams that are not, they don't have any use in concrete building, but they still build this kind of beams, I think it's called. And you can see there in the structure. So the wood culture still remains here in the building, even though it wasn't necessary in the new kind of construction with the new technology that they were using. And with this, I wanted to say that when we are talking about the new technologies and the old, there is always a mixture. And we still need some old metaphors and some old ways that still remain in a while and are useful sometimes, for example, to communicate. If you think, for example, about Wikipedia and why it was successful, and maybe it was because they used the old metaphor of the encyclopedia, right? And if you remember, I don't know, 20 years ago, there were so many attempts to build a collaborative production of knowledge platforms that didn't work, but maybe in this case it worked because everybody knew what an encyclopedia was about. So that was something that I think it would be nice to think of in the new possibilities of institutional design, how we combine the old and the new. I was also going to talk about the libraries, and I would mention that libraries, of course, are shaped by the idea of or the technology of the book, of course, and actually libraries and books provide a way of organizing knowledge and a way of thinking how knowledge is produced. And the public libraries, of course, maintain these ideas of a way of organizing knowledge through disciplines that sometimes are too separate, and a way of providing an institutional model that has to do with service provider, content providers, and this idea of read-only culture. It's not only libraries and other like museums, cultural centers, archives, or even, I would say, hospitals or schools where the users are only seen as recipients of receivers of content that is provided by the institution. So I think the kind of challenge that we have nowadays is actually, yes, looking at internet and web practices that actually provide platforms where the users are not only seen as readers, as spectators, but also as co-producers or potential collaborators. And I think this is truly the challenge. We see this especially in projects like Wikipedia that are like commons-based infrastructures, and especially in free software, or I don't know, the web itself with the TCP/IP protocols as a commons infrastructure. Where do we find the first institutional attempts to translate these practices in the physical world? Well, I would say that, of course, hackers were the first to organize kinds of presential events that introduced these practices with, for example, hack meetings, and then the hack labs with more stable infrastructures. And think, for example, how hack meetings were organized in the 90s, actually using kind of wikis where the program wasn't established and was defined by the users, by the participants themselves. So there wasn't a big division between organizing and content providers and then the participants. They all were the same, or potentially they could always be producing an event or a talk or demanding something. This, of course, and especially in Spain, we see this linked to social movements and self-organized social spaces. We have a very close example here in Governable here, and there's a hack lab there, but this is not something new. This is a tradition that lasts more than, I don't know, 20 years. And what I think it is interesting, I think, about Medialab-Prado is that it is an attempt to actually try to answer this question. How can we provide a public space that works as an infrastructure, an open infrastructure, where the users are the ones that are promoting projects and collaborating with each other through teams of collaborators that are formed by the promoter of the projects and those volunteers, those collaborators that want to join and form the groups and develop their own projects in quite self-organized way. And this is actually what we've been trying to do in the last 11 years. There's another stage of Medialab-Prado. It was called Medialab Madrid in Centro Cultural Conde Duque, and where also there was production, there was experimentation, there was connection between these different disciplines. I think that would be the second future of the cultural practices of the internet. One would be, the first one is that any user can become a co-producer or a collaborator. And the other one is the question of the connection between disciplines and how we can assemble different realms of practice and knowledge. And that's where I think we're trying also to connect with artistic practices, but not as an autonomous space, but as a place where we can find ways of collaboration and connections. So the idea is that the projects that are developed here that sometimes have to do with digital fabrication, I don't know, 3D printers, prostheses, 3D printers to build 3D printer, or a sewing machine, or a experiment in open textile, or a experimental video game, collaborative editing of Wikipedia, data visualization of the quality of the air. Actually, as you see, it's not oriented to a specific theme or technology, but actually any kind of project that is in a way experimental is able to be included here. How we can manage to handle this kind of diversity? So mainly through by 3 ways. The first one is the open calls for projects and collaborators through these production workshops that we organized in 2006. And here I have to say that this is very related to the first years of Arduino, and the first production workshop was organized actually with David Cuartielles. It was Interactivos in 2006. But also connecting this with other open source tools like Openframeworks. It wasn't called Openframeworks there, but Zachary Lieberman was there, and Pure Data with Hans-Christoph Steiner, and processing with Casey Reyes. And in this case, the idea again was to create a workshop where there were projects selected, but then there was an open call for collaborators, so actually anyone could join. So this production workshop model is the kind of model that inspired us to try to design the whole Media Lab as a production space. The second way to include and connect different types of knowledge and profiles is what we call mediation, active mediation or cultural mediation. And it's how we can make the place hospitable, readable for the visitors that come, and actually is the operation that allows any visitor to become a collaborator. The third one comes after the prototype has already been built, and has to do with, or during the prototype is built, is the documentation. And actually documentation is something that allows projects to have other lives. And it's also a way to continue the collaborations. So I would just like to end about saying something about specifically about FabLabs, and how I think FabLabs are interesting tools as I think citizen labs, and also when they're involved in wider contexts like a university or a cultural center, or there are libraries in a university, or there can be a library in a museum, and so on. So I think FabLab is also what we call the workstation that might provide good resources for projects at the FabLab, but also projects that are not specifically in the FabLab, but may need some help to build something. It's not the main part of the project maybe, but the FabLab is always supporting little things to all the different projects that are happening here. Maybe they are about, I don't know, citizen science. For example, downstairs they are building some microscopes, and they have just told me that in the FabLab they have built a tube to put the lenses that normally is quite expensive, and they designed something very simple that really solves a lot and saves a lot of money. So yeah, we're really interested in this connection with open hardware, Arduino, how we meet and cooperate in the presential space, so how physical computing has to do also with physical collaboration, and how it has evolved through other more complex projects like RepRap, for example, which I think it's also a great source of inspiration, and then open source ecology, and how things are growing. I think not only for technological reasons, but also mainly for or economical reasons that we could talk about, but mainly for political reasons, in the sense that it creates really new social networks, new ways of cooperation, and new ways of learning, exchanging knowledge, combined with new ways of living together, of how we relate to each other and how we cooperate. So I leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of what I'm going to talk about in terms of the Nerve Centre and its context in Derry, Northern Ireland, directly follows on your last point about taking on the kind of learning structures and collaboration and partnerships that are almost intrinsic within the FabLab style of learning and engagement, and how they have a kind of particular relevance to FabLab Nerve Centre. So just to give you a bit of background on like the key ethos in the local context and some indicative projects of FabLab Nerve Centre. The Nerve Centre itself is Northern Ireland's leading creative media arts centre. There's employs around 40 staff between its two sites in Derry, which is a small city, 120,000 people in the northwest of Ireland. It's in Northern Ireland, the UK, but it's just on the border with the Republic of Ireland. And Northern Ireland itself is very much a post-conflict society, which directly kind of impacts on the projects and the direction that FabLab Nerve Centre takes. The Nerve Centre itself encompasses a range of arts from cinema to music. It started literally as a 20 odd years ago about people more or less demanding rehearsal space for young bands in the city, and that is very much as the city centre of Derry was kind of massively bombed in terms of the period of the Troubles, which carried on for 30 years or so in the city. So it very much kind of was part of a regeneration process within the city itself. And so the FabLab itself initially had its funding from the EU Peace Funding Scheme. The EU have run this scheme for many years now, and it was specifically to redevelop towns and cities in Northern Ireland and to help some kind of reconciliation process there. So with that context, the FabLab Nerve Centre is most heavily used for projects such as teacher training and digital skills, mental health groups, social development, social community development groups, developing job skills, working with young people who are not in education or employment or other training opportunities, but also tying in artistic activity within that. And so there's a whole realm of kind of artistic activity, primarily, I suppose, socially engaged arts practice, where you have people who are already interested in making connections to those kind of communities, and they would see the Nerve Centre as a place that already has is a vehicle and a resource for those communities. So the whole FabLab team in Nerve Centre is working on this idea of developing the role of Fab Labs in post-conflict and divided societies, community engagement and education. So it's important to recognise that even in Northern Ireland, still in the post-conflict, even education itself is massively segregated amongst the two communities, the broadly, in broad brush strokes, the Catholic nationalist community and the Protestant unionist community, one of whom would have more loyalties to the idea of an Irish state and one of whom would have more loyalties to the idea of the British state. Those two communities are overwhelmingly separately educated. They go to different schools up to the age of 18. So a lot of what the Nerve Centre would do would be projects trying to bring children from those and young people from those different communities together, and this might be one of the few spaces that are actually actively involved in learning in a shared context, as opposed to in a context divided along sectarian lines. We'd like to think that the Fab Lab is kind of part of a movement developing best practice in this idea of using the tools of digital fabrication in the context of a Fab Lab for community development and for those kind of peace building strategies. So it's not connected to a university. It's in fact, Derry itself is a city that's very poorly served by the provision of kind of third level education possibilities. Most people studying at university level would have to leave the city. So it very specifically is kind of directly addressing the challenge of placing quite high-end skills that you would use for digital fabrication into the hands of a much wider community. So removing the need for university access in terms of people actually being able to get their hands on this kind of equipment and their training on the tools, with the tools of digital fabrication. Pip Shea is a critic who was taken on board this Future Artist Maker project early on, and she'd written previously about FabLab Northern Ireland, which is a partnership between FabLab Nerve Centre set it up, and FabLab Belfast, which is the capital of the region Northern Ireland. And she has written more kind of theoretically on that kind of peace building background. So I'll just read you some of what she had written here. Civic practices in Northern Ireland are often conflated with peace-building rhetoric, and therefore must be contextualized in relation to the sectarian conflict that began in the late 1960s, which in turn affects the rights and responsibilities of the citizenry. Colloquially known as the Troubles, this period was shaped by military and paramilitary violence by groups contesting the political sovereignty of Northern Ireland. So at a low for over 20 years now, violence has subsided. That process of reconciliation is very much still ongoing, and there is a top-down peace-building initiatives are common, although commonly contested. A lot of the most valuable peace-building kind of initiatives and cross-community initiatives are happening organically at community level, but there is kind of then governmental support and cross-governmental support and international support trying to resource a lot of these developments. So this, Pip Shea makes a connection between this and the broad critical term, critical making, which refers to reflecting on how we build ourselves, our cultures, and our institutions through processes of material engagement. It attempts to conjoin conceptually based critical thinking and goal-based physical making. So the making processes and the making ecologies that we try and develop within the FabLab, they are implicitly, to some degree, tied into a broader social direction of this idea of developing the idea of collaboration and partnerships. All FabLabs really, I think, are areas that bring together cross-disciplinary research. And even that idea of cross-disciplinary research, you're taking people out of their comfort zones and putting them in context with another profession, another set of experts, and they're having to invest their knowledge capital, their cultural capital, in that exchange with people from other professions. That, I think, at a very core level is a real important lesson for a kind of society coming out of a conflict, and which is sectarian, which experiences sectarian divisions. So the rationale for merging the two activities of critical thinking and goal-based physical making is to reconcile the gaps between the practice and theory of technologies. Critical making differs from other approaches to design and making in that it focuses on the constructive process as the site for analysis and emphasizes the praxis-oriented activities and energies of the collective. That again, although it's written there as heavy theory, is a really valuable on-the-ground lesson. You do have groups who would come into a FabLab and they may not have very high educational levels of achievement themselves. They may come from very kind of enclosed communities with very enclosed worldviews. And what we're doing is we're not only giving these people the introduction to all this amazing equipment, but we're also taking them out of their comfort zones to some degree, and they'll be training alongside other people, and they'll be sharing knowledge and working in new collaborations and new partnerships. So as well as kind of, so it is important that we're not just considering the materialities of digital technologies or of digital fabrication. Like all FabLabs, the FabLab Nerve Centre and FabLab Belfast are open to the public for free or in kind each week, and they share designs amongst the wider FabLab network, and they adhere to the recommended list of FabLab equipment. so as well as a lot of when you go into FabLab Nerve Center, 99% of the time there will be a local community development group or a local group of young people or a set of teachers or a set of 2 schools learning together. It's always an exceptionally busy space. And then recently we've introduced we've seen the kind of the natural connection between digital fabrication tools and the culture of digital fabrication and a broader kind of artistic practice, and the way that those 2 disciplines can kind of feed into each other. So one of the first kind of core projects that the FabLab took on, which had a more kind of direct focus on art, was the project called Temple. In 2014, David Best was commissioned to come to Derry in Northern Ireland to make this new commission by an organisation called Artichoke, based in the UK. David Best is most famous for the Burning Man, his involvement in the Burning Man Festival in the States, where he creates huge wooden structures, and then in a ritual sense, at the close of the Burning Man Festival in the States, they're burnt. And then that very readily kind of tapped into the history of and the culture and tradition of bonfires within Northern Ireland itself, which has a long kind of pre-history in beyond the Troubles, but during the period of Troubles they became very sectarianized, so each different community would have its own key dates, and on those dates they would burn a bonfire, which very quickly went from being a community cohesiveness to actually more of a kind of way of establishing a sectarian identity. So there would be quite kind of ugly events in many ways. But at the same time, there was a great degree of local pride, so they had this kind of paradox within them. So the Burning Man, the Temple project, very consciously tapped into that as a kind of indigenous arts practice, almost to some degree, amongst the local communities. So what they did was using the CNC cutter and using the open source design tools, the local young people and local communities were invited, and local community groups were invited to come in and to make their own kind of individual panels, which then formed part of the overall large-scale temple structure. It was built with a kind of large references to the symbolism of Celtic mythology, but also a lot of Eastern religions. And it oversaw the city on a height just outside the city. And then that was kind of at the period, it was open for 7 days, and people came and visited it, and they made their own mark by kind of leaving bits of paper within the structure of the temple itself, in which they would have written their own personal memories and things like that. And then at the end of 7 days, this was burnt as a kind of ritualistic bonfire, but it was very much a bonfire that was kind of bringing different communities together as opposed to being part of the traditional sectarian divide. So that's one example of the more kind of visual arts focused collaborations that FabLab Nerve Center has been involved in. Most recently, it's been involved in 2 other projects that really directly engage with the idea of community development and skills development, one of which is the Fab Farm, for which FabLab Nerve Center has just won a major award, major digital innovation award within the UK. The Fab Farm uses the skills of kind of aquaponics, and it works with a local special needs education project, and it gave training to these young people who were already quite socially excluded and excluded from lots of opportunities in education and culture generally. So trained them through the whole design and construction and fabrication process. And what the Fab Farm does is this special needs group now have an aquaponic farm on site where they're able to grow agricultural produce, salad greens, which they then pass on to key restaurants in the city. So it's been a kind of key project that the Fab Lab's been able to take a whole kind of client base through for the whole FabLab process of kind of collaborative design, collaborative making, and then working on a collaborative end result with other institutions within the city. And then also recently, the FabLab Nerve Centre has taken, so whilst it's based within the Nerve Centre, it's very consciously aimed to have kind of satellite projects. So even in a small town like Derry, which is 120,000 people, there are very closed off communities and different kind of housing estates within the city, and those people wouldn't even potentially feel comfortable coming in to the FabLab because there would be still one step of remove of it as a culture from their own background in terms of it would be associated with education and things like that. And these people may not have a particularly comfortable relationship with the education institutions in their past. So FabLab, even in a small city like that, has satellite Fab Labs within the city. So we've sent up 1 or 2 recently, and even beyond that, we've now been the first project globally, we think, to take a Fab Lab into a local prison. So McGabbery Prison in Northern Ireland, FabLab Nerve Centre has been in there training sets of the local prisoners in tools and digital fabrication and the whole kind of, again, the collaborative process of that, but it will be very specifically sold to the prisoners, not just as a kind of theoretical process of this is good in terms of collaboration. It would be very much based on job skills and transferable skills. So a lot of what the FabLab Nerve Centre is trying to do is kind of tapping into that sense that the processes intrinsic in digital fabrication and specifically within Fab Labs themselves, that idea of collaboration, that idea of partnership, that idea of shared learning has got a very specific role to play within a kind of post-conflict society such as Northern Ireland. And where the good thing for us in terms of this Future Artist Maker project is that then kind of broadened that out into a kind of whole European context. The fact that this is a partnership with other Fab Labs who've got a very different kind of client base and context within them. We've been able to bring those skills together, and it gave us the opportunity to bring artists from Northern Ireland to exhibition opportunities and networking opportunities within the Republic of Ireland and now here in Spain. So we've been very pleased with the project so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask you a question for the three of you. It's the general question, which is, we listen what you are doing already. So my question will be, what will be the next step in terms of art? Let's try to, in terms of artists, what will be the next step in your laboratories? What are the things that you are not doing, so that you feel that you have to do, no? So that something have to happen to improve, or maybe to open more to artists in general, no?
I didn't say that FabLab Limerick is part of the School of Architecture, but we are part of the Science and Engineering department. So the next step for us is, right now, the way we are perceived by the university is that we are kind of a cheap or outreach project. You know, like we are something that it costs almost nothing, and it gives public exposure. And actually, our vision is very different. We think that artistic practice can change, can disrupt in a very profound way the way science and engineering are taught and researched in our university. So the vision will be that we can create, the good thing about not being in a campus is that it's a blank space. So there is no expectations. It's not a new research building that costs millions of euros. like other buildings are being made in the campus at the moment. It's a blank slate. Nobody knows what a FabLab is, like especially in top management. So it's a place in which we can not only use new technologies, but we can create new procedures or new ways of teaching, new ways of research, new ways of engage art with science, new ways of doing research. So it's kind of that idea, because we're already seeing that in many other contexts. Like art, in some contexts, is providing practices, like different ways of practicing that traditional science or engineering can't go farther. No, it's that their way there. It's very good. Some procedures are fantastic, especially when you go to lab. In order to replicate experiments, but it has a limit also. So we think that it's not a kind of creating a parallel universe in which we have a space with artists, and we want to go to the core of our institution. For example, we saw in Malmo they have done very interesting programs in the university where art and engineering are more connected. So we think that that's an interesting way, at least to try. But of course, our limitation there is that our institution, parent institution, has 40 years old, and it's hardcore engineering and science there. So the culture is well established. So when you are going in kind of guerrilla style, there's a lot of conflict, but that conflict, I think, is extremely interesting. And places like we were talking about the Arts Electronica and the Future Lab is a place where they're trying to work in that, working with engineers from the car industry. So that's our goal there. What we are doing wrong? So many things that. That thing, engaging, making engineers and scientists to understand that what we are doing is not just, it could be more than outreach of doing 3D laser, 3D printing, laser cut summer camps with kids, that it has a profound, or it can have a profound impact on the way engineering is taught and researched. So that would be.
Well, I would say that the art practices and the art field provides a good context for experimentation or basic experimentation, in the way that normally art doesn't need to provide specific solutions or answers to problems, and provides maybe some fictions, some good questions, and I think in a citizen lab or in a media lab there should be always room for that. Also the so-called, I don't know, design noir or critical design, a way of providing new kinds of ways of looking at reality or question reality, providing new relationships or new ways of doing things, but without expecting a practical and direct solution. So it's a good field against the digital or the technological solutionism, that everything needs to be done for a specific problem that should be solved. So there are, in a way, there's still a lot of projects in that direction that, I don't know, I'm thinking some projects at the FabLab of critical design with furniture, that these pieces of furniture that provided, I don't know, context or atmosphere for different psychological states of the self. And I think also we can see it the other way around. What kind expertise, or what kind of experiences or practice can the artist provide to other projects that are meant to be more engineering or social or scientific or whatever. So how they introduce fiction, how they introduce humor, how they introduce new questions, new ways of looking at things. And I think it's actually like a way of seeing things. If I don't know, if you think of, I mentioned it before, a project like RevRap, it has to do a lot with, I don't know, with science fiction, the idea of building a self-replicating machine. So what kind of narratives are involved also with open source projects and open hardware projects. And I think that's why, for example, a platform like Arduino is interested, because it was always, you have examples of many different, like for maybe you can use it for a, I don't know, scientific experiment, but you can use it for, I don't know, a performance or a textile experimentation project that it's just for fun, for asking questions. So, well, I insist on what I said before, but what we're interested in is not in how the new technologies provide a good input or a good resource for a specific field, but how they provide a good context for assembling new types, different types of knowledge and levels of specialization.
For FabLab Nerve Center, I suppose the next step is almost immediately to begin building on this Future Artist Maker project, so which was the first time that Future Artist Maker project was the first time that the FabLab Nerve Center really targeted local artists and makers and artists and makers across Northern Ireland generally, and said, come and engage with this equipment. And so we are building on the success and the reception to the works in the exhibition project, which engaged with ceramics and 3D printing. We're very specifically looking to do a new residency with an artist from Northern Ireland based upon that, and a whole series of workshops which will then be open to the public and a wider kind of crafts and maker community across Northern Ireland. What's interesting as well is the way that the artists who did do the Future Artist Maker training opportunities within the FabLab, a whole training program. I mean, they took that training in directions that we couldn't have predicted, which is what artists and makers always do at their best. They kind of surprise you, and so we're really kind of pleased with that as a whole kind of learning process for FabLab Nerve Center itself. There's definitely learning in terms of the capacity for what is kind of deliverable within those residency programs. The idea of them being kind of open-ended and open to experimentation, and almost that idea of play is core. But the difficulty is to write that into kind of more broader kind of institutional strategies, and specifically funding programs and things like that, to be able to write in the idea of an open-ended process as opposed to a process which will have a fixed result, so that we're able to say X number of people will be trained and this will be an exhibition with entitled Y that'll involve so many artists and things like that. It'd be a much richer opportunity if we could almost have a programs such as artist residencies and artist training that we almost aren't having to mediate initially with a fixed series of results, that we're able to say what's exciting about this is that we're not sure yet what direction it will go in, but the fact that we're using these tools it's definitely going to open up opportunities that aren't already being explored.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I can continue, but I would like to. Somebody has questions? No? Take the advantage. They are the ones who take decisions on having new machines, putting more resources on on some things. Maybe it's the time to ask for these kind of things, no?
It's more of a comment just to add to what you've already said, in particular what you said about ways in to the new technologies and to the Fab Labs, open calls and all of the programs that are available. There was an Irish Design 2015 program in Ireland where the discussion was about silos. So towers of communities like engineers, scientists in their own blocks, in their own little walled off areas. And I think it's really important to discuss more about how to get the wider community into the digital fabrication scene. So those bridges and tunnels and gateways and all of the opportunities that they're, because it feels like a guerrilla system, definitely speaking to, I work in a university, there's a lot of opposition. So those gateways or opening doors and windows in those silos would really help. And I'd love your opinion on how they could be opened up.
In our experience, the guerrilla, it's like bottom-up approaches. They have a lot of benefits, but they have a cap, like a ceiling there that is very clear. For example, in Limerick, we are facing that ceiling right now. Like, it has been great for the first 2 years, very little questions asked, working with very little resources, but now we are part of, we are officialized now. So we need to start applying top-down processes as well. And that enters in conflict of departments, government, like the way our organization of thousands of people is governed and structured. So that creates a friction, which is super clear.
And what about the artist silo? So the artists, I had a very interesting conversation very recently with an artist, and again, she was very much, I want to make things by hand, and I work with furniture designers, and they're very much about the craft and it being about wood rather than other materials. So there's these silos that keep being entrenched, and I know in a conflict community, that's actually very interesting to see how you approach it.
Well, that relation with technology, I think places like the FabLab are redefining that. And every time a workshop, at least in Limerick, happens on ceramics, or I think it's important for us not making a distinction between digital fabrication and traditional craft. For example, this weekend we had a jewelry workshop, completely manual there, because that allows people to go there. They will do the kind of goldsmith work, traditional techniques, but then they are looking at the side that someone is using the laser cutter, and by curiosity, they will go there and ask. Like maybe half of them won't go, but then if you get 1 or 2 people, they become, and it's a very organic, unplanned process, which I think it connects with what Declan was saying, is that what happens when you are dealing with institutions, when everything is, the outcome of a project is, you have to describe the outcome of a project for a 3-year project in advance. And then, the way it's going to be audited is based on what you wrote down 3 years ago. That's kind of difficult. So that friction is going to happen all the time. I think it's important that we create an audit process that, in some way because you need to audit, especially public money, national or European. You need to make sure that the money is wise spent. But at the same time, it needs to be, I don't know, it's kind of more flexible processes. Because, and that's what I think spaces like the ones that we are running is, this is something that is a learning experience for these bigger institutions that we depend on. The problem is how to describe the interesting stuff, because it's not the machines, it's not even the communities. It's something that happens almost in this, it's an intangible thing. How you can describe an intangible thing and put in the right value to these people that are asking for outcomes and written paragraphs is very difficult. But I think it's not a niche problem. It's a problem that is happening in so many organizations, in government in general. So
I think also sometimes it's you start with, as opposed to being top down, you aim to start with the kind of skills base that is already out there. I mean, in a way, it's a generational thing that you will broadly find young people more welcoming to these new technologies, but even within that, I mean, a platform, a game such as Minecraft, I know that alongside the Temple project, then because that couldn't reach every school or every class in every school within the district of the city of Derry, what we were able to do was then introduce an online Minecraft build your own temple project, which obviously reached out to many, many more children and introduced them to the concept of digital fabrication, albeit an online version, but began to get them thinking in terms of construction and in terms of partnerships and collaborations. So it's kind of, and then potentially even like if the craft person you were talking about, if wood was their material, I mean, they probably do still very much exist in the digital realm where they have their smartphone and they're constantly online. So it's kind of trying to find tools. If you can find a stronger connection between a smartphone and a 3D printer, they will probably move much closer to an idea of engaging with it. But it is, when back in 2014, I think, when FabLab Nerve Center had a conference in the city, and I was new to the whole context, that I was asked, one of the questions I asked was, it's difficult to make that connection between handcraft and that kind of sense of touch, that tactile sense of so-called traditional crafts and traditional making, and then connecting that to digital fabrication. It's an ongoing debate, I think, for people to make that leap.
Well, here I would say that in order to open up, an institutional model, I think a good way can be not to identify it with a specific discipline. So if you have an art center, you know that the art institution, the art world is going to shape this institution as a specific field. So I think it's, from my point of view, it's more interesting to use concepts that are wider. For example, thinking that culture is also about technology, about science. There's scientific culture that could be included. That would be one way. And the other one is opening up production processes so anyone can get involved in different ways. So experts, of course, have a lot to say, but there's a whole range of different kinds of collaboration, even weak collaboration, should be possible. So I think that would be a way to include other other people that are not the ones that one should expect. Here, for example, the open textile workstation has been really useful to welcome elder people that wouldn't easily come here to the Medialab. And then it has been interesting how this lab has also connected with the FabLab and with other labs, for example, the electronics and robotic labs, and they were collaborating in creating some interactive textile and wearables and so on. So, I think creating not a specific approach, a wider approach allows collaboration. or allows other participation. But at the same time, makes it more difficult, the communication, because when things are so open, then, well, what are you doing? What is this all about? And I think this is another challenge.
I have one question about sustainability. So normally, well, maybe it's not about your space, maybe it is, I don't know. But normally, let's say, funding bodies, they understand more in terms of funding concrete and machines. So they think they set up the space, they spend lots of money on machines, and then the thing will start by magic itself, like people come and use. But of course, in the end, you need educational component, you need at least 1 or 2 persons who really kind of are fascinated by the concept and take care of the machines, because, I don't know, sometimes I think in theory what is happening that everyone is talking about 3D printers or laser cutters like some kind of magicians that you just turn them on and things happen by itself. But the reality is that really often you go in some space and say, oh, this machine is broken and this doesn't really work. So in the end, you need really good hands. And well, what we saw actually in Limerick, we were very surprised that you put so much emphasis on education. And that's how you get people like coming in and using the machines, because suddenly they understand what they can do and how they can master the machine. So I think that's why I want to ask, like, how you manage with this sustainability fact, like how you actually run the space in terms of people and educational programs. And then second, maybe as normally FabLabs are always branches of, let's say, universities or local authorities where the funding comes from public money. But do you think is it possible also to have a space what is self-sustainable, that you don't have all the time to have in mind, let's say, deadlines for the next year, budget, and so on? How you see this kind of sustainability future in perspective of sustainability? Yeah, thank you.
I think that's very contextual. Like each space will find or will not find a way to sustain itself by, it's depending on the context. That in our case, for example, by self-building the machines, you train the people that you're training the people not only to teach, but to repair the machines. So that's super efficient, because you have people that they know how to teach the machine, but they know the machine so well that they can, even not that machine, but similar technologies, the commercial ones. So you are in some way training the hackers for that. And that can happen because I've seen that people with no knowledge of digital fabrication, first experience, and 4 years later, they are advanced users and they know how to repair a laser cutter. I've seen that process. So for the human resources part, I think that's very effective money-wise. In Limerick, I think it's 1/3 of the money of our budget is produced in the FabLab. So we are not self-sustained. Like, we are not producing 100% of the money that we need. For the last, so we produce 1/3 of the money that we need. The other 2/3 is by hacking the institution in which we are. For example, I'm a part-time lecturer, so I'm getting a salary from university to teach courses. I'm using time, like a squeezing time of that to manage the FabLab. And then the FabLab is providing a third or a bit less, 20% 25% of the other part of the salary. But it couldn't be sustained by just the... So we are using always people has teaching assistant salaries, but that creates, again, that have a limit for us of operation. And now we have to become more official, and things need to change. And people are requiring other types of projects, other types of management, other types of funding. But for example, I've seen FabLabs in other contexts in which they operate 100% as a private company, and they work because they are in an ecosystem in which those skills and equipment are heavily demanded. In our case in Limerick, we have to subsidize this a little bit. So the prices that we put for money getting access to the technology are quite low, because then, But that creates another question: is what happened with a private operator, a guy who has a shop with a CNC? We had to be very careful of not getting jobs out of this guy, because otherwise we are harming the local economy. And that's it's super complicated. We want people to get, the FabLab should be an entry place for the technologies, so we can educate people can start using them, think about the possibilities, but at the same time, I don't think we have to become a place for, so we can compete with the commercial facilities, because then we are subsidized, not fully subsidized, but subsidizing, partly subsidized, and we will be, it will be an unfair situation with the private. I always believe in ingredients, and I think in our case, we are I think we have to be in a hybrid mode. We are a public, we depend on a public institution, we can and we are generating our own income, and that hybrid model should be explored, which is very weird in the university. You couldn't, well, I'm sure you can imagine, but we have so many problems. Sometimes we have money that can be, we have a big pot of money there, and we can't spend it on human resources because those pots don't connect with, so we have to make a very strange connection. So it's complicated. But I think the model should be, I'm very positive that we need to find that hybrid situation. And maybe a place like a test shop is the private, fully private. They work they operate in a complete different way. And then a public place like the FabLab network in Sao Paulo, which is 12 public FabLabs, completely subsidized, public. They work in a completely different way. They can have a FabLab in a favela. That could be completely, unsustainable. Whatever it's more like it's a medical facility, and you have a FabLab. They have the same role, and has to be subsidized. So, depends. In our case, it's hybrid.
Well, I don't see. If we understand the FabLab as part of a citizen lab, I cannot see a way for self-sustainability if we don't want it to become another thing. So if it becomes, a private university, then I can imagine a business model for that. If it becomes, a service provider for, building furniture or models or whatever, then you can imagine a way of income. Or if you think about this space as a place for events where you can rent for parties and so on, then you can think of economical benefit. But that wouldn't be a citizen lab, it would be another thing. So what I would say is that we should think of citizen labs as infrastructures that are really necessary for for our lives. And like, I don't know, we need to have the, I don't know, the streets clean, or we need good public education, or we need public health care, or whatever you think that is a basic service that the state should provide, or we should provide to ourselves. And think of the benefits. Normally, the benefits are many. They're not very direct. They're mostly indirect. So they are not so easy to measure. They might be long-term. So actually, in a way, it's a kind of a faith or a bet of what we think it's important as society. So yeah, that would be my point. Because thinking about, for example, charging the participants of those that come here to give their skills, contribute with their effort and their work to build an open source project that is benefiting clearly the society, it would be crazy. Because actually, in a way, they should be paid because they are working. And at the same time, if they were paid as professionals, then that would professionalize too much the context and the atmosphere. So weak participation, voluntary participation would not be possible. Amateur participation, voluntary participations. There are many professionals that come here, and they come here because they are not working. They don't want this commitment. They just want to contribute. And sometimes this contribution could be higher than the professional. So it's a way, I think, we need to provide this kind of context, that production context that don't follow the market rules. And yeah, I think this is why this is useful, and this is why this is called a lab, because it's a place for experimenting these kind of models that are outside the usual rules.
Yeah, there's an interesting kind of. There was a politician in the UK recently who publicly said something like, "I don't benefit by someone else gaining a good education," which just I think that we have to massively argue against that. This notion of not accepting that education is a public good, that the research that you do, and if you're developing your field of expertise, it doesn't have a public good beyond your own personal capacity and your own personal career. I think you really have to argue for education as a public good, and FabLabs are a kind of key context in which that argument can be made, I think, because they do tap into lots of different communities, and they develop skills in a very cross-disciplinary way. I mean, the idea of self-sustainability, it is key, but as you said, as long as it isn't used as a kind of neoliberal device to undermine core funding, basically.
I want to say just the figures, because we were talking about the figures. We make last year we make around 70,000 euros in the FabLab, and our calculation is that we need around 200,000 euros to operate the FabLab in terms of paying for the machines and all these things. So it's roughly 1/3.
Okay, more questions? Oh, wow. Okay. We're already out of time, so yeah.
No, it's just a fast question. It's basically the machines. You don't see that in the Fab Labs they are winning the proprietary machines lately. Like we started with rep wraps and laser lasur and these kind of things, but lately I see, well, which brand you have of laser cutter? This, yeah, the new one. No. The Austrian. Trotec, yeah, for example, Trotec, it has a very, very expensive machine, like 50,000, I think. They make you half, but you pay half, but it's 50,000 for 90 centimeters, 40 centimeters bed. But it cuts always. And yeah, I see in all Fab Labs are Trotex and these chop bots, the CNC, and I don't see anymore so much open source machines in there. Like, I don't know, this is, I mean, just like opening this discussion, like, I mean, if it's like, if we are losing the battle in a way in these institutions. Because these institutions in theory are pro-open source, but I mean, and we have ourselves like open hardware projects, and we see is very little people trying to push things to them. We have in GitHub, and we have very little people for the amount of impact some of the projects we have, like very little impact coming, like people coming back and trying to contribute to the open hardware. Yeah, basically the people asking a to-do list rather than you almost always have this to-do list in your mind, but they don't contribute to your project. Yeah, just like.
In our case, we were super radical at the beginning. Like the vision at the beginning was to build, to have all the machines should be open source. That was kind of the vision. But it was impossible. It was impossible to operate the FabLab commercially, having just open source equipment. So that's why we had to go to kind of the university and ask for buy some commercial. But we always try to have an open source version and a commercial version of the same technology. I think you're right. It's a balance there. Maybe it's connected to the critical mass again. You know, if it's technology like 3D printers, it's quite, you know, the open source community is quite healthy, and you have projects that are, you know, just very well supported, and you have Ultimaker, you know, as a fantastic example of a company based on open source, which is not now, well, but it's there, you know, and they have built a. And then you have to, for example, in the case of laser cutters, it's different because Trotec is you know, it's a very old company. So the laser technology, the commercial lasers are kind of maybe 30 years old almost. And then this new laser technology is based on, but for example, in CNC, maybe it's not the open source that we understand in Europe, but it's the Chinese open source. I don't know what they use the word, you know, that word that they use in China for, you know, they basically, they copy. No, it's a word that they use for technology that is copy. When you say, yeah, it's not open source in the Western style with this kind of ethos behind, but it works more or less like open source because competing companies shares documentation and blueprints and technology, and they create these clusters, for example, for making the Segway thing. That's in Shenzhen is a network of companies doing that. I think it's some sort of open source. For example, in CNC technology, that's becoming a really, really like a, you know, shopbot compete with the Chinese CNCs because they are popping everywhere. You know, it's the same.
It's almost like you are saying, actually. Like, for example, now, us and, well, Roman Torres, like, is another artist from Barcelona, and we are in Tallinn. We bought the same Chinese laser cutter, and with very big bet at the end, and for 3,000 euros. Well, a little bit more, it will be like 1,000 of importation and so on. And well, we bought because in David Cuartielles had one in Malmo. It's not the same. We had to research a lot on this, but it's like, I would say, 4 times cheaper than this Trotec and company, or 10 times cheaper than this Trotec and company. But it's really a challenge. We decided to bought because we bought both, the same machine, same model, same machine. And we thought, okay, if it doesn't work, we will make some kind of, yeah, like let's say open source project. Because it's not so complicated machine. It has like, if you see in the side, there is the stepper drivers, and there is a belt that moves the thing, and it's just not so complicated. Like Les Lasur, they build it. Just the Chinese are very, very efficient on the price. But like in all these Fab Labs, there had been this set of brands that they have very expensive, that then if like a small studio like us wants to get one of these machines, it's just impossible. Like we cannot, well, first the Trotec will not make us a discount for education thing of 50%. That's the first thing. I mean, it's fair. I mean, we are not education facility, although we do a lot of workshops in our studio as an artist. But yeah, I mean, 25,000. Well, we had asked some budgets, and we were like, well, I mean, if we will get some public fund to this pay us 50, I don't know, this kind of sometimes that you can ask some public fund for equipment for the studio, we maybe will think, but I mean, if we don't get this, that actually we apply, but we have to go from another way, because like otherwise we will never get this equipment.
Also with the, I think open source software and open source hardware, despite we might think that is the connection is kind of an pollution, I think open source hardware is in a very early stage, so we are still learning what are the similarities and what are the difference with the open source software. So we are in a learning process. Maybe look at China, what is happening with the hardware in China. We could learn ways of business models, things that are happening right there. I think the interesting stuff is happening. Regarding open hardware, I wouldn't say open hardware, but this kind of affordable hardware platforms is happening there rather than in Europe or States.
Well, we're going to have also another table with a more technical manager of the Fab Labs. But I would say that from my experience and one of the recommendations we do from when sometimes we help and assist some institutions to start their Fab Labs is that remember that they have to remember that it's not so they have to invest in a really long term. It's not only buying the machines once and kind of forget it. And you always, as a technician inside these institutions, will face the problem that sometimes some artists has better equipment in their houses than the one that we have. That usually happen, especially when you are in another level of production. But it's important strategically always take, because sometimes there are happening too many things around that you don't see that you have to really take care and invest a lot in your equipment. And also, I have another question, but I won't do it. And I will leave it around. Somebody will answer between today or tomorrow. Is what is the next step after the Fab Lab? No, what are we gonna have? What are we gonna have in our laboratories? No? So it's time. Thank you very much, Marcos and Declan and Javi. So we are gonna have a break for lunch. It's open, so everybody else or me. And we have until 3 in the afternoon that Felix can go with anybody to any place. There are many restaurants, and if you want to ask, we can ask. You can ask Tessa or Daniel. Give us his presentation. Okay. See you later.